Barkho from Ancient Assyrian Props and Costumes. Here today discussing Ancient Assyrian Scale Armour and some of the work that I've been doing in regards to trying to recreate something that has an authentic lacing system, or what could possibly have been used back in ancient times. So what we have here is some examples. These are pictures of scales from the British Museum find. These scales are NEO-ASSYRIAN, have been dated to Neo-Assyrian times, and were actually found in Iran. So in not Iraq but Iran. So we can see the scales seem to have 3 holes at the top on the right hand side when looking at them front on, and 4 at the bottom with a curve at the bottom there. And I'm starting to notice a pattern regarding the 4 holes, and the curvature. When you look at other examples, as in this case here, from Kendrill's 1974 work, you can see the 4-hole system and the curve seem to be placed more or less in the same way, except type 6. So type 2, you've got 2 holes, 4 holes, 2 vertically and 2 horizontally. Type 3, you've got 4 holes, 2 vertically and 2 horizontally. Type 5, same thing, you've got 2 vertically and 2 horizontally, 2 vertically and 2 horizontally, and the curve seems to be in that direction. And even the type 4, which has 4 holes down at the bottom, also seems to have the curvature on that side as well. So you can start to see patterns in, generally speaking, you can start to see patterns start to emerge regarding these ancient scale types. And type 4 is an example of a hole system that I think is very similar to copper alloy or bronze scale, which has a cartouche on that scale signifying Ramses the second, and that too also has the curvature at the bottom with the 4 holes grouped together, just like type 4 in that Kendrill had identified. And these are from Nuzi, and obviously I'm assuming this would have been found in Egypt. So although the placement of the 4 holes in the Nuzi ones are on the left hand side, whereas Ramses has his on the right hand side, you can see that the 3 holes up at the top are in the same, and that center hole seems to be slightly above, which seems also to be a pattern sometimes found in other scales as well, when they have the 3 up at the top. And it's really fascinating. There seems to be a similarity. And regarding the Egyptian one, the similarities between the type 4 Nuzi and the Ramses II scale are pretty similar. And I just wonder whether or not scale armour in Egypt was introduced also with the Hyksos in the first or second intermediate period. What I mean by that is when we know that the chariot and the composite bow was introduced into Egypt with the Hyksos, and I'm thinking that also this technology, this of scale armor, was likely introduced or made very popular during the Hyksos invasions. And as always, the Egyptians would have taken that idea, like they did the chariot and the composite bow, and Egyptianized it. However, the introduction of that idea could possibly have been by the Hyksos when they were in Egypt. Now, when I started my work on this supposed reconstruction, at the time I didn't have any access to these theses, and now I do. So it's interesting, because what I'm starting to notice is the stitching based on the reconstruction done in the British Museum of the ancient Assyrian scales that were found in Iran. There is problems with it, and they even suggested that it's more than likely incorrect. So I thought I'd give it a go and see exactly what I could come up with. And what I did was recreate a scale not as wide as these, because I know that in ancient Assyrian times, at least, there seems to have been curved pieces and rectangular or squared ends on either side. So to come up with a scale size, that was a bit tricky, because I didn't really have any specific measurements. So I think these scales are made at around 7 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters, or very close to that. And as you can see, this was the prototype that I had made, and the whole system is totally taken off the British scales, or the ancient Assyrian scales in the British Museum, and you can see that compared to the Nuzi style whole system, the differences in the whole system lie in the fact that it's pretty much opposite. So what I mean by that is the British whole system has the 4 holes on the right hand side, and the 3 holes up at the top on the right hand side, and the 4 holes at the bottom at the left hand side. Whereas in the Nuzi finds, as you can see here, this specific type with the curved end is in the opposite direction. So instead of having your 3 holes on the right hand side, you've got them on the left in the Nuzi finds, and here are the 4 holes at the bottom, the 2 vertical and the 2 horizontal, are also on the other side of the plate. So you can get around that by simply turning the plate over, and when you do, you get a whole system that's identical to the Type 2 Nuzi finds. And so I think that there is a strange correlation between these scales and these scales. And even in Nuzi finds, they did find, for example, in the Type 5, you seem to have 2 types which are pretty much mirror images of each other. So they have scales with the 3 holes up at the top on the right hand side, but they also have this other scale which has the exact opposite, pretty much a mirror image of that scale to the other side. Now, I decided to recreate these without the curve, and my logic behind that was, if I create it with a curve, then should I in the future decide to want to make scale pieces that had square ends at the top and at the bottom, then I would have to remake another plate. Where here I can still use the same molds and then grind that piece to a curved shape in order to get that. So with the one mold, I'll be able to get two styles should I really need to. You can always take off material, but you can't add material back on. It's very hard. So this was done after only having had this much information, and yeah, after seeing this thesis and the whole system and realizing that there are similarities between that and the British system, I thought, hang on a minute, here we could possibly do something for the Nuzi style lacing system also. And I had not seen Kendrill's work, but it seems like my stitching that I came up with here is much more similar to Kendrill's lacing system suggestion in this particular example than the British Museum. And here I have a sample, and that sample is this particular style of lacing system. You can see the placing of the plates is correct, and I've specifically made this lacing system to recreate that British one that's in the museum, and I can see the problems. Problems is that gap between the rows of the plates is not good, and mind you, I did the stitching as tight as possible as well, but it would be, I think personally, a shame for the armourers to go to all that effort to create these scale pieces and have the leather worker stitch them up in a way like this, where it's possible for a person in a melee when they're in battle to cop a thrust that could possibly go between the two layers. It's or an arrowhead going in between these scales in this horizontal fashion. Now, the Kendrill system is very similar to that British system. The difference is what I'm noticing is the fact that he overlays that one hole over the top of the third. So what happens is, in Kendrill's system you have the two holes here and the one hole at the bottom, and what happens is when you put the other plate on top, then this last hole marries up with that top hole from the bottom scale, and that gives it a good locking system. Now you can see any blows are not going to be any thrusts are not going to be getting in between the plates. The stitching is much tighter. However, Kendrill's system only has one layer going through and then coming back and going through and coming back and going through and coming back and going through and coming back, and I'm a bit concerned about that, because as far as I'm concerned, I think that the body armor was meant to be for protection, and the last thing you would also want in a battle is if someone would cop the stitching, and then with one stroke the plates would start to unravel. That would be a total disaster, and to be honest, render the armor nothing but a hindrance, and kind of give you only one chance. So although one chance is good, I want more chances. So I think that has to do with the lacing system, and what I've done is I've doubled up, and that gives me that crisscross pattern, which even though it's a little bit, it's not as spread out as this style of the British. You get a much tighter gathering of the scales. There's still enough movement, but there is total protection. And when I doubled up that lacing system for Kendrill's system, which I'd used here, that top row, you get something that's very, to me, that's very realistic. And another issue that I have with this British style of stitching is the fact that we'd already recognise that the four holes are usually where the curve is, and you imagine, I mean, these plates are not even overlapping, and if you were to add that curve, the gaps created in between and all over the body armour would have been substantial. So that system is definitely incorrect. However, there is commonalities between this system and Kendrill's system, and this is the way that they're gathering the rows together, and that seems to be something that I also agree with, whether it be from the British system or Kendrill's lacing system. They're gathering the rows and then they're stitching the rows together with in Kendrill's it doesn't look like a zigzag stitching, but in essence it is, because if you were to go another layer using Kendrill's idea but in the opposite direction, you end up with that crisscross stitching. And all I've done in this body armour is pretty much recreated without knowing Kendrill's system, but this is what Kendrill's system would look like from the front, and I've done that here at the back. Now there's something very interesting that I'm finding. That system of lacing, that four holes at the bottom with the curve and the three at the top. Let me just say that I think that we can brush aside any ideas that it's not possible to put the lacing system, to put together the scales in a laminar fashion, because that's what I've tried to demonstrate in this particular example. So here, in order for it to qualify as a laminar system, your stitching or your scales would have to be placed in a manner where you have your bottom row on top of the second bottom row, and then on top of the third bottom row, etc., etc. And that's what I've done regarding this particular example. And if we were to curve the heads would be curved all upwards, which is orientated in a direction that is sometimes shown in reliefs. And I'm starting to realize that the orientation of that curve dictates whether it would be a scale or a laminar. And what I mean by that is the only possible way that you could get those heads to mimic the curved heads, to mimic what's on the archaeological evidence, as in on the reliefs where the curves are facing upwards and on top of each other, is to layer the curves in a laminar fashion. And if you wanted them in a downward position, then that would mean that the downward position, the next one would have to go and sit on top of that to give you that downward head curve, and so forth and so forth. So yeah, if it's facing up, if the curved head is facing up, it's a laminar stitching fashion, and if it's the scale head coming down, then that curved head coming down, then it's of a fashion that would be more related to scale armour. Okay, I've still got time. Now, what else did I want to talk about? I wanted to talk about another thing here, regarding that very top stitch across the top in Kendrill's reconstruction. I've done the same thing on mine, and it's to be honest totally pointless. What I mean by that is, as you can see, it doesn't take much for that stitching to come apart, as in off that, and then create a very loose tightening system. It would have been much better had he suggested to go backwards, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, just horizontally across. So this stitching, or this style of stitching, that in that very top whole row in his reconstruction is in my point, like in my opinion, totally invalid, because you can see the results of that, and it doesn't take much for that lacing way to come undone and give you loose scales at the top, just with a little bit of movement. So yeah, it's really interesting. I've created these pieces with polyester resin, and to be honest, when I first started making them, you can see that these, I had inserted the strip of fiberglass and then was pouring the resin, and while they're very strong, sometimes they were leaving me with air pockets in the mold. So I dissed that and started just pouring the polyester resin into the molds that I'd created from this master copy. And what that did is it gave me pieces quicker and much more easier to sand down and not have to deal with fiberglass particles. But yeah, they're also very brittle. And just another note, what I think is very important regarding this here now, just to give you an idea of the amount of plates that I've used. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. So I've got 35 in a row, so that gives me 70, and that's 70, that's 140, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 23, so that gives me 40, 46, 20, 60, 69. So that's almost 70 pieces. And then here you've just got 5 across, so that's 10. And then another 10 scales. So all up, you're looking at approximately 230 pieces in just this front part of the body armor. And I know from having made some attempts earlier than this, but not in individual scales like I have here, the back chews up more. So the back of the body armor chews up more pieces. So if you say the back will chew up 250 and you got 230 here, you're looking at 480 scales, individual scales, and that's without the sleeve. So according to the archaeological data and the research that's been done on them, I'm in the same range as in the amount of scales to use. So yeah, that's interesting. I'm having issues concerning the sleeves. Really, that's a tough one to figure out, and hopefully one day I can figure that out. But it's very tedious work, especially the stitching. Very tedious, very tedious work. Now, another thing is, after having seen this, Kendall's second suggestion here, while I'm happy with this one more or less, although I would be inclined to crisscross and have as many different stitchings as in threads as possible, because each thread is a chance. Yeah, that's what I'm starting to notice. Each thread is a chance, so that if one thread breaks, it's not going to unravel the scales apart. So it's possible you could use four 4 different cords to go through that whole system, besides the 2 at the used to gather the rows. So yeah, and I think that's a very crucial point that would be important, very important, because it's a shame. It would be a big shame for armourers and the leather workers to go to all that work only to produce something that was pretty mediocre regarding the stitching to put on their body. But this particular style, where you've got 2 scales pretty much butted up, my concern regarding that construction is that even when you get the other heads that overlap or sit in between this section, you still have a section in the center that's unreinforced, and you'll be having those gaps all the way across the rows and all the way up the scale armour. And I think that's a potential for disaster, the same way that this gap here is a potential for disaster and renders the armour pointless. So with all due respect to Kendrell's research, I do think that there is a fundamental flaw in this particular lacing system, and that is the fact that when you butt two plates together, it's even when you get the overlap here and possibly an overlap here, you're still left with gaps in between each scale and all the way along. So I would not validate this particular lacing system.